Last time we spoke, Hong Xiuquan had gathered a rabble of peasants, named them the god worshippers, and declared war upon the Qing Dynasty. He gave titles to his closest comrades, forming the North, South, East, West, and Flank Kings, who led the great Taiping armies on a march towards the secondary capital of China, the Great Walled City of Nanjing. Countless cities fell to the Taiping, and the Qing desperately tried to encircle and quell the menace. But the Taiping never stayed in any given place long enough to be captured, and even when they were dealt significant losses, they simply moved on and recruited more and more to their just cause. Their armies grew exponentially, and so did their conquests, until they reached the secondary capital of China, Nanjing. Nanjing was put through a brutal siege and taken, her citizens put to the sword, and now the Taiping held a grand capital city. This episode is the Taiping Rebellion Part 3, the Heavenly Kingdom of Tianjin. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Craig Watson. But before we can begin, I just want to remind you all, this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia and much, much more. So go give them a look over at YouTube. So please, subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that you are still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel over at YouTube, where I have an entire 45-minute episode on the Taiping Rebellion, and I have just unleashed a 7-part series on China's warlord era. It's kind of a sneak preview of what is to come on this very podcast if you think about it. I am also currently creating a Discord for my personal channel and the various podcasts I'm part of, alongside a Patreon account so that I can provide some more specific content for those of you who might like that. So just let me know what you would like to see, and tell me on my Pacific War channel over at YouTube, or you can go over to the Kings and Generals Discord. Just shout out at me. 14 years after his first vision, Hong Xiuquan, alongside an incredible 2 million followers, had captured the secondary capital of China, Nanjing. Hong Xiuquan, the Heavenly King, Yang Xiuqing, the East King, and the surviving Taiping leadership had developed their military based on the work of the late Feng Yunshan and their combined experiences from the march from Thistle Mountains all the way to Nanjing. Much like the military structure, the new capital would have 4 families linked to every corporal's family, and 25 family units linked under every sergeant. These communities would build the public granaries, chapels for worship, and so forth. The sergeants would dwell in the chapels. The corporals would take their family and those families under their command to Sabbath to worship. Every Sabbath day, all senior officers from generals to captains would visit one of the great churches of the sergeants to pray and work hard, obeying the 10 commandments of the Taiping. By day, people would work the land, all serving in some form, whether it was pottery, ironwork, carpentry, masonry, whatever according to their skills. The land under the Taiping rule was divided up amongst all those, with 1 full share for every man and woman aged 16 and older, and half a share for children below 16. All of the land was graded according to its productivity, and when land was insufficient for the people's needs, the people were moved to land that was plentiful. Of the products of labor, each corporal saw to it that every family under him had food, but all the rest went to the public treasuries. Sergeants checked the books and tallied the accounts, presenting records to their superiors. And it was said, "For all the people of this earth are as the family of the Lord their God on high. And when the people of this earth keep nothing for their private use, but give all things to God for all to use in common, Then in the whole land every place shall have equal shares, and every one be clothed and fed. This was why the Lord God expressively sent the Taiping Heavenly Lord to come down and save the world. The public treasuries would give gifts to every family at times of birth, marriage, and death, according to their needs, but never in the excess of 1,000 copper cash or 100 caddies of grain. Surpluses had to be maintained in case of famine or war. Every family unit with a living male head had to give a soldier to the army, but the Taiping would not take widowers, widows, orphans, or the childless, nor the weak or sick. With births came new families, and every fifth family gave a new corporal, and every 25th a new sergeant, and so on. All officers and officials, even the highest, would be reviewed every 3 years and promoted or demoted according to performance. This was the system pushed out upon Nanjing when it was taken. And as you can imagine, it was a Goliath task to meet such demands. Thus, the system could not actually be implemented all at once. But they were diligent to the starting task of listing and recording and keeping everything to establish it further. Not everyone flocked eagerly to the Taiping ranks. Many households were reluctant to register their members, and they hid for weeks, and countless fled Nanjing. The Taiping burnt down countless Taoist and Buddhist architecture, smashed statues and images, and stripped or killed their priests. Everyone was to conform to the new Taiping religion. Notably, though, the Chinese Muslims in Nanjing were not attacked and their mosques were allowed to stand. One group in Nanjing that were in a position of particular ambiguity were the Catholics, who numbered just 200. At least 30 Catholics were burned in their homes or cut down in the streets during the early chaos. The Taiping found the Catholic survivors in a Catholic church, but when pressed, they refused to recite the Taiping liturgy. The Taiping authorities gave them about 3 days to comply. Then they burst into the church and destroyed the cross and overturned their altar. 70 to 80 Catholic men had their arms tied behind their backs, and they were given a trial before a Taiping judge and condemned to death unless they said the Taiping prayers. Many of them refused, opting for martyrdom. But in the end, 25 eventually recited the Taiping prayers, and the rest were sent to be vanguard forces in the army. In order to push the movement, the Taiping had to seize the Nanjing printing industry to distribute their sacred texts to all the sergeants for reading and preaching. Back when the Taiping captured Yangzhou in April of 1853, they had acquired a printing press craftsman, so they brought him to Nanjing to start the process up. Hong Xiuquan made 3 major strategic decisions. The first was to select Nanjing as the Taiping capital, now known as Tianjin. The second was to create the printing system to promote the Taiping program. And the third was to alter many nameplaces in China. Hong Xiuquan proclaimed henceforth that the city of Beijing was to be renamed Yaoxue, the Demon's Den, and the province of Zhuli, Criminal's Province. When all the Manchu demons were destroyed, Beijing's name could be restored, and that of Zhuli Province, once its people repented for their sins and began worshipping the Heavenly Father. Hong Xiuquan went on further to say, "The world has long been deluded by these demonic Tartars, and it is imperative that they soon be destroyed. But before we destroy these people, we must first destroy their bases. And before we can destroy the power of their bases, we must first destroy the bases' names." Empress Yanfeng, by definition, was the leader of the earthly demons, and Hong Xiuquan changed his name that meant united in glory to have a dog component added to it, while simultaneously using it as a term referring to the Manchu. The Taiping followers in Nanjing were told the time to end sexual separation had not come yet. Thus, any man who forced themselves upon a woman, whether they be veterans or new members, were to be executed. Those who worked as prostitutes would not only be executed, but also their families. Male homosexuality was severely punished. For those who were 13 and older who practiced it and were caught, you were beheaded. If you were 13 and younger, you could be spared, unless it was proven you were an active partner. The city of Nanjing was divided similar to what the Taiping did in Wuchang, with blocks for men and those for women and children. Those skilled in specific types of labor lived amongst another. For example, carpenters lived with carpenters and tailors lived with tailors. Hong Xiuquan had a ceremonial hat made with a fan-shaped front, decorated with twin dragons and twin phoenixes. The other kings were allowed to have twin dragons as well, but only one phoenix. On the upper part of Hong Xiuquan's hat, he alone had written, "The mountains and river are unified, and the heavens are filled with stars." The three surviving kings each had one line embroidered on their hats. For the East King, Yang Xiuqing, "Long phoenix perching in the clouds." For the North King, Wei Changhui, "Long phoenix perching on the mountain's peak." And for the Flank King, Shi Dakai, "Lone phoenix perching on the pony." Hong Xiuquan had 10,000 people work for 6 months to build him a palace in the former site of the Governor General's mansion, in the center of the northern side of the main residential city. Within mere days of taking Nanjing, the Qing began counterattacks leading to the gates of Nanjing being reinforced with additional gates built in front or behind the existing ones. Cannon emplacements and palisades for gunners were created en masse. Forward defensive encampments, wooden watchtowers as high as 30 or even 40 feet were created. Smaller towns surrounding Nanjing were reinforced. Large swaths of area had ditches dug, palisades erected, felled, some honeycombed networks of small round holes with straw placed over them and bamboo spikes put underneath. It was basically a regional fortress built with the purpose of overthrowing the Qing. Now, until the capture of Nanjing, the Taiping had made a mobile force whose success was largely in part because, well, they would seize a major city and simply move on before the Qing could even get to them. The establishment of their Tianjin capital meant the core of the Taiping movement, its leadership and central army, were now all in a fixed position. The Qing could finally plan and coordinate large-scale actions directed at their capital. Interestingly enough, the decision to hunker down in Nanjing is what many scholars regard as the crucial reason for their eventual failure. Many argue if they had simply done what they had done best, and took Nanjing for perhaps a month or so, and moved on to hit Beijing, they could have very well toppled the Qing dynasty. Nonetheless, the Taiping were in a good position in Nanjing compared to that of Beijing. It is estimated in 1853, Nanjing held 18 million taels of silver, while Beijing was depleted to a possible 3 million. The Nanjing granaries by the end of 1853 totaled 1,270,000 puculs of unhulled rice and 750,000 hulled rice, sufficient to feed the Taiping for many months. An American missionary named E.C. Bridgman visited Nanjing in May of 1854, and he reported this. "All the people we saw were well clad, well fed, and well provided for in every way. They all seemed content, and in high spirits as if sure of success." The surrounding areas continued to supply Nanjing with grain, and the Yangtze River continued to serve as its artery of communication and trade. Now, once they had Nanjing, the Taiping set out to accomplish their ultimate goal, the final defeat of the Manchu demons in Beijing. But when the Taiping took Nanjing, a lot of internal strife began to grow. While Hong Xiuquan was a bona fide religious and political leader to the Taiping, he was never alone, and although many of the great figureheads had died, a few large ones remained. Yang Xiuqing, the East King, Wei Changhui, the North King, and Shi Dakai, the Flank King, were the three largest leaders alongside Hong Xiuquan. Yang Xiuqing established himself as the highest ideological leader, above that of Wei Changhui, and in many aspects, above Hong Xiuquan. When Xiao Chaogui, the West King, died, Hong Xiuquan made a proclamation that granted Yang a supervisory power over the four other kings, clearly promoting him above the rest. When Xiao Chaogui died, Shi Dakai also sort of filled the dead king's space in many ways, and when Nanjing was captured, He was the only king constantly occupied in the field, directing and personally leading Western campaigns. Hong Xiuquan, as the spiritual leader, began to gradually isolate himself within his palace, only acting through proclamations. Wei Chenghui, the North King, acted as the coordinator for the defenses of the region around the capital, and he was responsible for food supplies. This left general administrative supervision in the hands of Yang Xiuqing, who also acted as the coordinator of all military campaigns. Now, Yang Xiuqing, back in the early days of 1851, had coalesced the Taiping when he began in trance-like states to state he was the mouthpiece of God the Father. Likewise, Xiao Qiaogui had these trances where he said he was the mouthpiece of Jesus. Oh, and there was a lot of roleplay in all of this. When Xiao Qiaogui spoke to Hong Xiuquan in a trance state, he would refer to him as younger brother. And likewise, Yang Xiuqing would refer to him as son. Both Yang and Xiao, it seems, were in league with another, using this unique trance-like behavior to raise their status. But when Xiao died, there was a lot of confusion, leading Yang to stop messing around for a while as the voice of God the Father. But in December of 1853, Yang once again began to speak publicly as the voice of God. Yang began a campaign where he attempted to humiliate the heavenly king using trances as the voice of God. And I just want to take a moment here to say this. For those of you who haven't seen my personal channel, the Pacific War channel over at YouTube, shameless plug, sorry. I'm the kind of YouTuber who really likes to use cinematic footage. But as you might imagine, there's not a ton of films or series made on the Taiping Rebellion. But good old CCTV made a little drama series on the entire Taiping Rebellion, and I have to say it's actually kind of hilarious to watch. You can actually find it for free on YouTube. I believe it's called The Heavenly Kingdom, although it is in only Chinese. The reason I bring this up, if you check out my Taiping episode, you'll notice I use this very specific clip that happens a lot in the series. The clip has Yang Xiuqing doing the trance that I'm talking about, and it is by far one of the funniest things you've ever seen. So stating that, I just wanted to say it's worth, checking out my episode on the Taiping Rebellion or finding this series and looking for the episode that has Yang Xiuqing in it. It's really worth your while. Back to the story. Yang begins a campaign to humiliate Hong where he uses the voice of God to accuse the heavenly king of growing to be too harsh and indulgent with his power. He says that he is too harsh to women who serve him and far too indulgent of his 4-year-old son. One accusation in particular was that 4 of Hong's palace women were treated so badly that they should be released from Hong's palace and instead should live out at Yang's palace. Yang says Hong orders women under him to work in the rain and snow and allows his concubines to sneer and scold the other women. Oh yes, despite all the laws, Hong Xiuquan and many of the Taiping leaders have concubines. Remember when I said the Taiping Rebellion was like a proto-Marxist one? Well, like any good Marxist, they don't live by the way they preach. Shots fired. Yang Xiuqing continues to argue the women officials are prevented from their duties by the mean concubines and that of Hong Xiuquan, who he says has actually kicked some of them in anger and punished pregnant concubines similarly. Something that is a very serious crime for the Taiping. You just don't kick pregnant women. He follows this up, saying in God's voice that the heavenly king should receive 40 blows of the rod for his derelictions. To this, Hong publicly prostrated himself to receive said blows, so that God would forgive him. Hong's 4-year-old son is said to be too self-indulgent and willful because he plays in the rain and he smashes presents given to him. This is a weird quote that I read. God states he must stop all of this because it will lead to him abusing the people in the future when he becomes the leader. Yang Xiuqing did not stop at just attacking Hong. He also went after 2 others in particular, the North King Wei Qiaogui and the Marquis Qin Dynasty, both men who had been with Hong since the earliest days at Thistle Mountain. Wei Qiaogui was an educated man. Qin was a miner who studied military arts and proved himself a formidable strategist. For years, both men handled key military assignments for Hong. Qin was regarded as a senior-ranking Taiping officer after the surviving kings. Yang Xiuqing began to use the voice of God to humiliate Wei in many ways. Whenever his trances began, Yang's women attendants would summon Wei at once using drum calls, and if Wei was late, the women would berate him for this. Wei was constantly forced to kowtow to Yang when he was in trance, and when Yang was in trance, he moved by sedan chair, while Wei was forced to walk beside it. Yang made sure to keep his attendants on Wei's ass, always disturbing him. Qin had to endure a similar style of humiliations and was forced to help carry Yang's sedan chair up the palace stairs a few times. To give some more flavor, here is one story about a clash that occurred in December between Yang and Wei. Yang one day in public suggested that Hong had more than enough embroideries and robes in his palace, and that he should economize for a time instead of getting any more. Wei ignored what Yang said and told Hong, "You, our second elder brother, are the true sovereign of all nations of the world, and you are rich in the possessions of all within the 4 seas. Although robes and garments are sufficient, it will still be necessary to be constantly engaged in making up more." Upon hearing this, Yang responded, "I beseech you, our second elder brother, to pardon this younger brother's crime, and to permit this younger brother to memorialize straightforwardly. If apparel were insufficient, then it would be necessary to make up more. But if it is said it is sufficient, it will be better to delay the making up of more, and then we can see the second elder brother's virtues of economy and love of man. Why should our younger brother, Wei Changwei, memorialize the necessity of constantly making up more clothing?" To both of the kings, Hong replied, "Brother, Yang Xiuqing, you are certainly what the ancients called a bold and outspoken minister. And you, brother Wei Changwei, although you may have a sincere regard for your elder brother, you are not so straightforward and open in your statements as our brother Yang, for which he is to be much commended. Later in the reign of the young monarch, all who are ministers should imitate the example of our brother Yang in speaking straightforwardly, as he has done this day. Thus will they fulfill their duty as ministers." A lot of these events, like the one I just told you that story, they occur a bit later on, but I just wanted to give you a taste or the idea of what's going on in the background. Yang was humiliating the others and doing whatever he could to take more and more power. Now, of the 5 original kings, 3 survived, and the administrative staffs of the former 2 simply were distributed amongst the 3 survivors. But after Nanjing was captured, the kings would not be the solo ruling leaders anymore. Additional princes were added. They were similar to the kings, just lesser so. And in all honesty, if you go right now to, let's say you check on Wikipedia, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, it'll get extremely confusing. The term prince, or sometimes they're just referred to as kings, or sometimes they're referred to as something completely different. Forgive me if during this series I fumble between the term king and prince, because most of the sources change it as well, but more or less they're all kind of just kings. But there is always one thing for sure. The original kings who had started out in the Thistle Mountains, they are the overarching leaders of the Taiping movement. They are the head honchos. So everyone after them are quote-unquote lesser kings. Many of these people come at various different times, but here is a list of some of them. The Zhong Prince, Li Xiucheng. The Ying Prince, Chen Yucheng. The Jun Prince, Lai Wenwong. The Fu Prince, Hong Renda. The An Prince, Hong Renfa. The Yong Prince, Hong Rengui. Another Fu Prince, Hong Renfu. And the Gan Prince, Hong Rengan. Yes, our old friend Hong Rengan, but he will come much later on in the story. Now it seems Yang Xiuqing orchestrated the creation of many of these princes, and this led to the multiplicity of administrative staffs to make it easier for him to weaken the authority of most of his senior rivals. Honestly, Yang Xiuqing reminds me of members of Hitler's inner circle. You got Himmler, Goebbels, Göring, and of course Martin Bormann, who at any given time were trying to, belittle each other and fight to have the Führer's ear. But for the Taiping, Hong Xiuquan was literally fighting to kind of overthrow Hong Xiuquan. Although in many ways he didn't need to really do so, because as we're going to find out in this story, Hong Xiuquan, for whatever reasons he had, really just isolates himself and lets his power fall away. Now, Hong Xiuquan was acting as the commander-in-chief of the Taiping military, and he sent out 4 offensives, 2 towards the north against Beijing, and 2 up the Yangtze River into western China. Hong Xiuquan's overall plan was to use the northern and western expeditionary forces to create a large pincer to capture the whole of northern and western China. According to missionary Brigman, the Taiping had 4 armies in the field, carrying on active aggressive operations. 2 of these had gone northwards. They were designed to cooperate, and after storming and destroying Beijing, to turn westwards and march through Shanxi, Jiangsu, Gansu, and into Sichuan, where they were expected to meet up with 2 other armies, which from Jiangxi and the Lake provinces were to move up to the Great River and along through the regions of its southern bank. The northern expedition of around 80,000 men was led by 2 commanders, Li Kaifang and Lin Fangxiang, who led the vanguard to take Yangzhou on April the 1st. By May the 8th, they left Yangzhou after receiving reinforcements, and they advanced towards Qiaoqiao in Anhui province. As their forces went into Anhui and Hunan province, they were bolstered by local bandits, particularly the Nian rebels, who were performing the Nian Rebellion simultaneously. Again, I apologize for making a side note here. The purpose of this series ultimately is to tell of the century of humiliation of China. And for a large part, the 19th century is full of countless rebellions. The Taiping is just the largest one, but many others are happening in the background. I don't know if I can actually talk about all the other rebellions here on this podcast. That's why I'm bringing up a few times now, might I add, the idea that I might make a Patreon, and it would be for my personal channel, the Pacific War Channel. But as you all well know, I do 2 podcasts for Kings and Generals. This one, The Fall and Rise of China, and the Pacific War Week by Week podcast. So I was simply thinking if I do go ahead and make a Patreon, I could make exclusive content that kind of just is a bonus to all these podcasts and other works that I do. So, for example, the Nian Rebellion could very well be a Patreon exclusive podcast I'll do in the future. But if this is something you would actually like to listen to, you really gotta let me know. Because I'm going to be brutally honest, I am very unwilling to make a Patreon unless there are people who really want exclusive content. I simply don't want to make a Patreon that doesn't give people something that they want. Anyways, going back to the story. Following the same strategy applied in the Hunan campaign and the Yangtze Valley, they moved rapidly through Anhui and Henan without leaving behind garrisons nor supply stations. At first, they did not even attempt to take any cities that proved to be well defended. However, at Huiqing in Hunan province on the border of Shanxi, they used their 80,000 strong force to besiege the prefectural city, believing it held rich military supplies. The siege lasted 2 months, but the Taiping failed to capture it, and they had to move on. This caused a delay in their march as a result of failing at Haiqing, and it seems to be a decisive turning point for the northern expedition as a whole. The Taiping suffered horrible losses in both shock troops and officers, while the Qing court in Beijing gained valuable time to prepare against the impending Taiping attacks. The Taiping gradually penetrated Juli via Shanxi province and reached the suburbs of Tianjin. And it was here another large mistake was made for the second time. The Taiping could have simply marched on Beijing, but yet again they chose to attack a secondary target. The Northern Expeditionary Force was tiny compared to that of the entire Taiping army, which really should have consolidated and simply marched upon Beijing. The Taiping were greatly hindered by northern China's winters, because do remember, most of the Taiping were from southern China. The Qing had begun a war of attrition, making sure to take away foodstuffs in the path of the northern expedition. The Taiping found out extremely the hard way that foraging in winter was not easy. And on top of that, the Qing even broke dikes in the Grand Canal to flood the Taiping out. Emperor Xianfang released what would be his greatest weapon, the Mongolian prince, Zeng Guofan. Prince Zeng was from the Horqin, the left banner of Inner Mongolia, and a member of the Qing clan. He was a 26th generation descendant of the Caesar, brother to Genghis Khan. His name, Zeng Guofan, was made up of two Tibetan words meaning lion and treasure. When he was just a child, he was adopted by Sudnam Dorji Ajesag, head of the Mongol banner, of the Horqin left back banner, and Junwang, second-rank prince under the Qing Dynasty. He would inherit his adoptive father's titles during the reign of Emperor Daoguang. It was at the 1853 battle for Tianjin where Prince Zeng would earn his fame. The Taiping Expeditionary Force had fought its way bitterly from Nanjing to Tianjin, leaving just 80 miles between them and Beijing. Prince Zeng rushed to the scene, aided greatly by a valuable ally, winter. The winter ravaged the Taiping. Many of them had never even seen snow in their lives, and this forced them to fall upon a village fortification to survive it, causing an immediate stalemate. When the weather broke in spring, Prince Zeng ordered his troops to build a dirt and stone wall to encircle the entire Taiping army camp from a distance, while a crew of 1,000 laborers spent over a month digging a series of trenches to connect it via a dry riverbed to the Grand Canal over 40 miles away. When they broke the dikes, the canal water rushed in, flooding the Taiping camp to its rooftops, drowning a considerable amount of the army and forcing their submission. I want you to take a moment to try and visualize how all of that worked out. That is an incredible feat of engineering. Being a Mongol, Prince Zeng and those he commanded preferred the bow and arrow as their chief weapon, something they had overwhelming supremacy over compared to the southern Chinese. The Taiping could have overwhelmed Prince Zeng's cavalry units if they had Western firearms, but they did not. The Taiping forces were dispersed and destroyed. Lin Fengxiang was captured at Yiqian in Zhuli province on March the 7th of 1855, and Li Kafang was captured at Fenghuatun in Shandong province on March the 31st of 1855. This was the ultimate end to the northern expedition. Had the Taiping marched on Beijing at the rate that they were going, it is argued by many they probably would have taken down the Qing. Tactical blunders, logistical issues, severe weather, and the capability of certain Qing commanders, such as Prince Zeng, ultimately put an end to the Taiping threat to Beijing, though they certainly were nowhere near defeated. While the northern expedition was going on, there was also a western expedition that left Nanjing on May the 19th of 1853, just 11 days after the northern expedition launched from Yangzhou. The objective of the western expedition, as conceived by Hong Xiuquan, was to follow the Yangtze River and ultimately meet up with the northern expedition in Sichuan province. This would have resulted in a pincer maneuver that could swallow up all of western and northern China. On June the 10th, the western forces recaptured the vital city of Nanjing, which had been taken back by the Qing forces. They were able to provision up from there and divided the force into several armies to march through the Yangtze Valley. One army was commanded by Hou Yiguang, who set out north of the Yangtze to conquer Anhui province. Lei Hanyang took another army south to conquer Jiangxi province. A third mobile force led by Zhang Tianyang began to independently attack cities south of the Yangtze. Hou Yiguang's force got as far as Luzhou, the new capital of Anhui province, at the time. Luzhou was guarded by one of the most capable Qing commanders, Qiang Zhongyuan, a Hunanese native from Xining. He became the magistrate of Xiuxu and Li Shui, earning a reputation for being a great scholar and a military leader. Zeng Guofan recommended Jiang for a higher office in 1850 to Emperor Xianfang, but when he was supposed to leave for Beijing, his father died and he had to return home to mourn. When the Taiping Rebellion began, Jiang was appointed to assist the Grand Secretary, Xia Shana, in quelling the insurrection. Jiang began a campaign of gathering Hunanese volunteers who, for the first time, fought outside Hunan. It was one of the first waves of local forces led by a gentry class to fight the Taiping menace, something that influenced future Yongying armies. Zeng won a great battle in Guangxi and was promoted to the rank of first-class sub-prefect. When the Taiping were invading Guilin in 1852, Zeng led his men from his home of Xining to attack them. He won 3 major battles and managed to lift the Taiping siege of Guilin, earning the rank of prefect. After this, Jiang thwarted a Taiping naval invasion of Hunan province. He dammed the Xiang River near the Suyi Ford and ambushed the Taiping navy, causing massive casualties upon them. It was a battle I had mentioned previously, where 10,000 Taiping men and Feng Yuxian had perished. He thwarted the Taiping overland invasion of Hunan and besieged the Taiping stronghold of Changzhou for over a month before they fled to attack Changsha, the capital of Hunan. Jiang was one of those who helped defend Changsha, earning the promotion of provincial judge of Hubei, and then by 1853, assistant commander of the Qing armies in Jiangnan. He then aided in the defense of Nanjing, which was besieged from June the 22nd to September the 24th of 1853. For this, he was appointed governor of Anhui province, which is what led him to the Battle of Luzhou. When the word came that the Taiping sought to attack Luzhou, Jiang rushed over with a small force to try and defend the new capital. He found himself outnumbered and outgunned, especially in siege mining technology, that the Taiping had dramatically improved by this point in time. The Taiping took the city by January the 15th, and in the process, Jiang was wounded, and he opted to commit suicide by drowning himself. The Qing lost an important capital city and one of their finest commanders who had proven himself successful at defeating Taiping using local militia forces. Lei Hanying's army besieged Nanjing, the capital of Jiangxi, from June to September of 1853, but ultimately failed to take the city. This resulted in Lei losing his command and his army divided in two to hit Hubei and Hunan under the leadership of Wei Jun and Shi Jianxiang. The high point of their campaigns led to the capture of Xiangtang on April the 24th of 1854. After over a year of taking Nanjing, the Taiping's expeditions had run out of momentum. The northern expedition was a failure. The western had gained limited success, but not nearly enough to extend their reach to the upper Yangtze, and that of western China. The Taiping riverine forces dominated the Yangtze up into Hunan, allowing them to use it for provisioning, logistics, and more importantly, further recruiting. But the original lightning speed drive of the Taiping had faded, and the Qing were beginning to recover from the blitzkrieg. Now the offensives became seesaws, which allowed the Qing more time to recover, reorganize, and build up new leadership that could effectively face the Taiping menace. Being a Pacific War specialist, it's very much like the situation during the Guadalcanal campaign. Prior to the battle for Guadalcanal, the Japanese ran rapid, always on the offensive, controlling the when and where actions would occur. But after the horrible loss at Midway, and then at Guadalcanal, the Japanese had gone past their logistical capabilities and they lost the initiative. For the rest of the Pacific War, the Allies controlled the said initiative. This is what we call the turning point. And it was here, a year after taking Nanjing and losing the window of opportunity to take Beijing, that was the Taiping Rebellion's turning point. It is not to say they could not win the war, but the initiative was now in the hands of the Qing. Although the campaign to take Beijing failed, and the Western campaign only held limited success near the Yangtze, the Taiping were steadily extending their territory, and thus they were gaining additional manpower and supplies from the greater Yangtze region. The Taiping were struggling to consolidate their gains to establish better rule, however. Their offensives were being hampered by both political and religious confusion, often orchestrated by the efforts of Yang Xiuqing. The Taiping structure threatened Chinese traditions and saw backlash particularly from the gentry class. I would note, the gentry and landowner types probably were not the keenest on a group that sought land and wealth redistribution. Go figure. But something you really need to grasp in your mind is that the Taiping were a threat to Chinese social order as much as they were a threat to the Qing rule. Thus, the gentry of China began to put their resources together to help the war effort, resulting in a large push to the creation of Yongying militia groups such as Zeng Guofan's Xiang Army. On top of that, external actors were trying to destroy the Taiping. The Taiping were having a ton of inner conflict as well. A violent and bloody power struggle had emerged, destroying the unified political and military command established under Yang Xiuqing. Now, although I spoke about the formation of the new armies, I need to go into it a bit further, especially in regards to Zeng Guofan. While I explained how Zeng Guofan created his force, I did not talk about how this all looked from the Qing Dynasty's point of view. In late 1852 and in early 1853, a number of edicts were made by Emperor Xiaofang, leading to the appointment of 43 supervisors of new local corps in the provinces of Hunan, Anhui, Jiangsu, Zhuili, Henan, Shandong, Zhejiang, Jiangxi, Guizhou, and Fujian. Amongst the appointed was Zeng Guofan. The Qing government sought to have these organized, smaller forces led by the gentry class, so they could be loyal and relied upon. These forces were set up in each district to contest the Taiping. Zeng Guofan's Xiang army proved themselves to be highly effective, but Zeng Guofan chose to be very cautious when reporting back to the Qing court. This was because his military organizational building was strongly autonomous and could be seen as a threat to the Qing military. There had been numerous local militia groups that shifted from pro-government to banditry. The establishment of these armies were obviously a last resort means, and definitely could be seen as a threat to the dynasty. They were not so unlike the bandit armies created in the 17th century to fight the Daxi or Dachshun armies after all. Zeng Guofan did not state exactly what he was doing to the Qing court, and in one of his first memorials he simply reported back that he was enlisting men from the countryside to establish a large military corps in the capital to be trained. It looked like Zeng Guofan was building a personal army, one that could be led on campaigns outside its local area. He sent more memorials stating the local corpsmen could be relied upon in critical moments, and that it was better to recruit from these local corpsmen an official militia whose rations could be paid from public funds. When he was building the Xiang army, he was consciously departing from the Qing court's authorization. He realized the local defense corps that had sprung up all over China were useful against local bandits and small raiders, but they were not large nor strong enough to withstand attacks from larger organized armies such as the Taiping. The Taiping were only growing larger, more organized, better armed. They simply could not be stopped by just local corps. What the Qing needed was a mobile army that could be used for offensive campaigns throughout larger areas. Now, the way Zeng Guofan made his Xiang army was based strongly on personal loyalty. The units were recruited, led, and paid for by their commander. The commanders were loyal to Zeng Guofan. Thus, more or less, the Xiang army was a personal army at his very command. Zeng Guofan had also assembled a number of future leaders who would go on to create their own versions of the Xiang army. Such men were Zheng Zongtang and Li Hongjiang of Anhui province. By the end of the century, Zeng Guofan's example led to most provinces being dominated by regional forces under military organizations over whom the Qing central government had only minimal control. In many ways, Zeng Guofan was a symptom of the ailing dynasty. The Qing were gradually losing control, and there was an emerging threat to the political and social order in China. Zeng Guofan said the Taiping menace was a threat to traditional Chinese society. He made many proclamations stating things such as, "The Taiping rebels have stolen the ways of the foreign barbarians when they distort family relations by calling all people brothers and sisters, when they declare that all land belongs to the heavenly king and that all profit also belongs to him. They force scholars to give up Confucian classics to read instead the so-called teachings of Jesus Christ. They wipe away our moral standards, the very way we conduct ourselves as humans, the classics, and the institutions that have existed in China for several thousands of years. This is not only a tragedy for the Qing dynasty, but a great tragedy for the whole of Mingqiao, Chinese tradition, and causes Confucius and Mencius to weep bitterly in the underworld. How could any educated person remain sitting, hands in sleeves, without doing something about it? Zeng Guofan kept bringing up how the Taiping destroyed Buddhist and Taoist temples, that they were angering the gods who would take their revenge. To right these terrible wrongs, he said he was under Qing orders to advance his troops by land and water, not just to ease the Qing monarchs, but also to console Confucius and Mencius, to avenge the slaughter of millions of Chinese. Appealing to the masses, Zeng Guofan began to ask for recruits, financial support, and the surrender of any who decided to join the Taiping. Now, I said he paid his army handsomely compared to that of the Green Standards and such, but a lot of the funds were not under Qing control. The gentry class were strongly supporting those like Zeng Guofan. Zeng Guofan began to ask and obtain permission from the Qing government to sell certificates of academic degrees, official titles, and office appointments to sell to these said gentry. The sale of all of these degrees and titles increased gentry contributions, but it also increased their influence, and it began to build a new gentry role in the leadership. Another major source of income for the Xiang army was the new internal custom tax introduced in 1853. And although the Qing government permitted this new tax, it held no control nor supervision over it. Zeng Guofan and other commanders of regional armies were gaining control over regular provincial taxes, and they were using them to build up their armies. The combined income from the gentry class and the regional taxes made men like Zeng Guofan basically warlords. Ironically, I just finished creating a 7-part series on China's warlord era for my own personal channel. And by the time this podcast comes out, I believe at least half of those episodes will be out on my channel. So please give them a look. I put a lot of effort into it, and it's actually quite different from other content I've made in the past. I used a lot of new techniques, and I really tried to change my style, so to say. I also used a lot of footage from CCTV dramas, and I have to say, after watching hours upon hours of those shows, I really deserve some views. Oh my god, it's a lot of work. Anyways, back to the story. Their forces were not really governmental troops, although they were fighting for said government. On the other side, the Taiping failed to gain any support from the gentry class because of their alienating religious and economic beliefs. Fundamentally, the Taiping were a revolutionary group breaking the stratum of Chinese society, and a large part of that was the Chinese gentry class. Now, Zeng Guofan began with an army of just 1,000 men in 1853, composing of 3 battalions. When they began to really clash with the Taiping, they were soon 20,000 strong, with naval and cavalry units. Later on, they would become 120,000 men strong, and Zeng Guofan had planned to use them for a long, drawn-out campaign, despite pressure coming from Beijing to smash the rebels immediately. Now, the first major engagement between the Xiang army and the Taiping came in early 1854, and the Taiping defeated them. But on May the 1st of 1854, the Xiang army defeated the Taiping at Xiangtan, forcing them to withdraw. Then in the Battle of Yuzhou in Hunan in July, the Xiang army on land and river gained a major victory. This victory gained Zeng Guofan great prestige and demonstrated the effectiveness of his army. The battle cost the Taiping more than half of their fleet of boats, and thus the loss of control over the central Yangtze River area. It was the first serious setback for the Taiping, and it reduced their perimeter of military operations. Following up this victory, the Xiang army entered Hubei province and quickly recaptured Wuqiang and Hanyang by October of 1854. And soon, Zeng Guofan's forces began to penetrate into Hubei and Jiangxi provinces, marking the failure and end to the Taiping Western Expedition. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please, go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that you are still hungry for some more history, why don't you give my personal channel a look over at the Pacific War channel over at YouTube, where I have a 45-minute episode on the Taiping Rebellion and a 7-part series on China's warlord era. And if you want to hear more exclusive content and you have some subjects in mind, please let me know, because I'm probably going to make a Patreon account to tackle exclusive subjects. One subject that I have in mind is a piece comparing the opium wars to the fentanyl crisis seen in North America today. So if you want to hear stuff like that, please let me know. You can find me at the Kings and Generals Discord, or just put a comment on any of my videos on YouTube. The Northern Expedition was a complete bust. The Taiping had lost the opportunity to claim the Dragon Throne. But the Western Expedition proved somewhat fruitful, and gradually the Heavenly Kingdom was growing. And perhaps, one day, it could eclipse the Qing.